So, some legislative and regulatory facts about the BRS. So for the same reason that we just talked about in arbitration, that's why it's important to have someone with railroad experience present in all legislative and regulatory venues that affect our members. We talked about it earlier, but this perspective is paramount because we'll either go in and explain why what they're doing is a really good idea or why what they're doing is a really dangerous idea. So on the regulatory side, we do this with the Director of Research. So the Director of Research monitors the Federal Register and is up to date on all regulatory issues, whether they're proposed or current, that affect our members. And just like we talked about on the legislative side, on the regulatory side, having a person that's done the job out in the field and he understands how a regulation is either going to be good for us and good for the working public or bad for us and dangerous and unsafe. And so he brings that perspective. So one of the things I would note is in the Federal Register, these are emails that come out every day. They're several pages long, and he has to look through that and decipher if there's anything that's in there that affects our members. And usually what will happen is it'll come under the Federal Railroad Administration, and it'll be a change to a regulation that's in place. And these changes include a change to an existing signal system. So let's say they wanted to just do away with intermediate signals. That will come out in the Federal Register. If they want to remove a signal system, that'll come out in the Federal Register. If they want to abandon a rail line, sell a rail line, or any other waiver, it comes out in the Federal Register. In 2019, the FRA invited us to a listening session about how technology can make railroad grade crossings safer. And the short of it was, when we showed up, it was myself, it was President Bowles, and at the time our Director of Research, Doug Vanderjack. And we showed up, and we were the only labor people that were in the room. There was probably 30 railroad Class 1 people that were there. And there was, besides that, there was a lot of regulatory people that worked at the FRA there. The first thing they started talking about was crossing regulations. And they said about those smart bungalows, we don't really need to have a maintainer come out and test the batteries anymore because we have battery health monitors out there. And we really don't need those guys to do that. And then the next guy jumped up and said, yeah, we really don't need to have maintainers come out and make sure the lights are working because we use LEDs, and they don't burn out. And even if they do, they're so bright you can see them from a mile away. And then the next guy said that, hey, we really don't even need to have anybody go out to hear if the bell is working because we have sound monitors that can say if the bell is working. And they said we have all these different recording devices that are on the crossing that says if the gates are down, if they're up, and all these other things. They even said that we don't have to do ground tests out there because there's no way that a ground on a light could cause a crossing to malfunction. And then they finished it by saying that, as a matter of fact, even though we don't have very many activation failures, which we talked about earlier is every maintainer's worst nightmare, the ones that we do have are because maintainers come out and do their tests, essentially insinuating that we're causing activation failures, which is totally not true. Because the reality is that when we go out and we do grade crossing tests and we do our work, that's what keeps the crossing safe. So eventually we spoke back and we told them. We said that the battery health monitor, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but even in my own experience, I've gone out and I've tested my batteries. And when I turned the power off, they had a shorted battery and the crossing started going up and down and acting all haywire. I was there to catch that. Okay, so if the power went out, who knows what would have happened with that crossing. Okay, battery health monitor would have never caught that. We also informed them that, yeah, you do have light outs. Okay, and you can tell if that light's burned out and it's not. I said, but what those monitors can't tell, they can't tell which way that light's facing. So if you have a semi-truck that drives by and he cuts that corner a little bit too close, he might take those lights and he might swing them, and instead of actually being pointed at traffic, they could be pointed at a farm field. You could be warning cows or horses that a train's coming, not necessarily the public. In fact, sometimes that grade crossing, the gate itself could get hit and spun. And instead of actually blocking the road to where you're not blocking anything and somebody could get hit by a train, we have to be out there to do that. We informed them without having a print in place. We were able to indicate that sometimes they actually bury that signal cable that is the lighted cable in the same ditch that they have the crossing control cables on. And when they run rail equipment through, let's just say that an undercutter came through or a piece of equipment, and it nicked those two cables, maybe it wouldn't ground out right away, but in time, and this happens because we've seen it happen, those two wires can short together and you can have an activation failure. And that's why we're out there to do ground tests to make sure that doesn't happen. And then finally, we informed them. Maybe they weren't asking the right questions. Maybe they needed to ask how many times that signal maintainer came out there, and because he did his test, he found a problem and repaired it before it caused a tragic consequence, before it caused an activation failure. If we didn't have a union in place, all those things and those points that we just made, they would have went unchallenged. And there'd probably be some relief on the regulations for the railroads. Instead of us going out and doing our safe and life-saving tests, if the union wasn't there, they probably wouldn't even be in place. So our director of research also files complaints with the FRA requesting that it investigate violations of what our current regulations are right now. I don't know if everybody's aware of it, but signalmen are covered under hours of service. They're covered under random drug and alcohol testing. If your supervisor goes out and covers a call, okay, and does what our work is under the federal regulations, he has to fill out hours of service forms, and he's subject to random drug and alcohol testing. So if that happens, you need to let your local chairman know, and he'll run it up to the general chairman, and we get a report on it. We send it to the FRA to try and have it enforced. We do that. If a crossing fails, and they say it fails at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they say, hey, you know what, I don't want to pay 2 hours overtime or 3 hours overtime for you guys to come out and cover that call, so we're just going to wait until you come on duty. That's not fixing a crossing with undue delay, and that's a violation of the federal regulation. So when those things happen, you need to let your local chairman know so that he can run it up and we can file on that. That's another one of the things that he does. He also attends industry conferences where they're talking about new technology. And again, he's there to find out what's going on and to either say why this is a good idea or why it's a bad idea for our members.